Hello from Kensington and the World, a podcast that explores the intersection of Western and Islamic cultures. I am Mark Silinsky of Kensington Security Consulting. Today, let's delve into the Kensington archives of women we love. Let's start with an Italian. In earlier videos, we looked at some of the boutique social issues in Italy, illustrating the Muslim-non-Muslim friction. There was the plastic pig of Padua standing in the window of a delicatessen as a symbol of resistance to Muslim demands that it be removed. Then there was that nonsense about Italian and French women who adopt pigs to walk them in the streets to keep Muslim men at bay. Now, how the silly fable took hold in Europe and India escapes me. Well, it's easy to have fun with inane stories, but Islam in Italy and throughout Europe is serious business, and Oriana Fallaci was a very serious social critic. So I would like to take a look at her life and the impact that her writings had on shaping European opinions. Why did I select this celebrated, vilified, quoted, scorned, admired, and hated Italian journalist? Well, because in my judgment, her insights into the European-Islamic relations are really second to none. She died about 20 years ago. She argued, and I quote here, "There is no place for muezzins, minarets, fake teetotalers, their so-and-so Middle Ages, and their so-and-so chadors," unquote. Whoa, what a woman. So let's buckle up and take a look at who exactly this woman was. The independent scholar Hugh Fitzgerald condenses her writings into the argument that Muslim immigration was turning Europe into a colony of Islam. She borrowed the neologism Eurabia, coined by Bat-Yoer, to refer to the Islamification of Europe, which in her words would, quote, end up with minarets in the place of bell towers, with the burqa in the place of the miniskirt. And she wore plenty of miniskirts in the 1960s and early 70s. Fallaci argued that from its inception, Islam was driven to conquer Europe and force it under its rule, and it came dang close a few times. Until the 21st century, the apogee was probably the Siege of Vienna in 1683. The armies were beaten back and Europe became resurgent in technology and science. That invasion had been halted. Now, here is where Fallaci became very controversial. She claimed that, quote, children and boats instead of troops and cannons were the invasion force. She continued, quote, "The art of invading and conquering and subjugating is the only art at which the sons of Allah have always excelled," unquote. Whoa, such sulfurous rhetoric. Well, you can see that she's a woman who certainly spoke her mind. Was it over the top? Well, was the only art in which Muslims excelled subjugation? What about the architecture, calligraphy, some of the poetry, decorative arts? Also, is there a historical analogy between invading Muslim armies and today's migration? I don't think so. Many of the migrants today are being invited in, escorted in, shepherded in, and protected when they come. So I don't know if that migration is really analogous. Let's dive into the argument. First of all, who was she? Well, she was one of Italy's most celebrated and later reviled journalists who died in her late 70s in 2006. She covered the Vietnam War and interviewed Henry Kissinger, Indira Gandhi, the Ayatollah Khomeini, and I particularly like the story about her very truncated interview with Ayatollah Khomeini. We're going to get into that. Her spunky persona developed early. Her father was a partisan during the war, captured and tortured by Germans, and as a 14-year-old, she was a courier for the Italian resistance in Nazi-occupied Europe. As a young journalist, she took risks while covering the 1956 Hungarian Revolution and its crushing by the Soviet army. In my view, she developed a rare wisdom while covering these wars, and particularly the Vietnam War. Now, she was a loud critic of American efforts to defeat communism there, and she was hardly alone. But she gained insights into the American and European left. And with these insights came a contempt and anger. She began as a strident critic of the American war in Vietnam, but she was increasingly alarmed at the ruthlessness of the North Vietnamese, and she became consequently more sympathetic to the Americans. She developed a great hatred for American leftist poseurs. She threatened, quote, to kick Jane Fonda in the ass and spit in her face for lying about her coverage of the Vietnam War and betraying the confidence of American POWs, unquote. She developed a respect for Israel, particularly Golda Meir. Fallaci developed an early concern about Islam, Arabs, and Muslim leaders, and she interviewed a slew of them, some real big shots too, Khomeini, Arafat, Gaddafi, and PFLP leader George Habas. She was a Christian Arab and terrorist, and she was not impressed. My favorite stories are tryst with Ayatollah Khomeini, whom she described as a humorless fanatic. Standing in front of him, she ripped off her chador in his presence, yelling that, I won't wear these medieval rags. Well, as the story goes, even the grim old man laughed at her bravado. What a woman! After September 11th, 2001, her views on Islam crystallized. According to Al Jazeera, she adopted, now this is Al Jazeera's view, an anti-Islam stance. Well, maybe, but these ideas did not spring from nowhere. By the mid-1960s, she was disturbed about Islam and its presence in Europe, and she began to see it as first a threat and later the primary threat to Western liberalism that she and her father and fellow resistance fighters fought for during World War II. After 9/11, she saw that as her journalist, it was her obligation to report on the Islamic threat. Now, Hugh Fitzgerald, that independent journalist, stressed that Fallaci did not stir anti-Islamic sentiment. She never called for violence. Was she an activist? Well, in her writings, yeah. It was intended to be objective and thought-provoking. Could this have led to action? Yeah, it certainly could, but she never called for violence. She wasn't that rabble-rouser. In fact, she probably would have thought that it would be very low rent to do this. She was really a woman of ideas and a truth seeker. She was convinced that Islamic law was antithetical to Western values. She took Muslims very seriously, unlike many thinkers on the left. When many Western professors and opinion makers dismissed the triumphalism of Muslim immigrants to Europe, Fallaci took them seriously and at their word. When Muslims boasted that Islam is an unstoppable force in Europe, Fallaci sounded the alarm. This earned her both followers and enemies. 3 of her books commanded the attention of fans and opponents, and these are the big ones. There's The Rage and the Pride, The Force of Reason, and Oriana Fallaci interviews herself, in which she described the Muslim world as, quote, an enemy that we treat as a friend, unquote. And she warned Europe about what she called the danger of becoming Arabia. So these are a few of her observations, and I quote, the Muslims refuse our culture and they try to impose their culture on us. I reject them, and it is not only my duty towards my culture, it is toward my values, my principles, my civilization. The increased presence of Muslims in Italy and Europe is directly proportional to the loss of our freedoms. Another one. I find it shameful that nearly all the universities of Europe, Palestinian students sponsor and nurture anti-Semitism. I defend Israel's right to exist, to defend itself, and not to be exterminated a second time. Unquote. Go, girl. Here. Europe is no longer Europe. It's Eurabia, a colony of Islam, where the Islamic invasion does not proceed only in a physical sense, but also in a mental and cultural sense. Well, and towards Iran, quote, without Khomeini, we would not be where we are. What a pity that when pregnant with him, his mother didn't choose to have an abortion. This Spitfire was plucky to the end. And today, from the grave, she exists certainly in memory. Italy and the rest of Europe is far more Islamic and populated by Muslims than in Oriana's day. She would be crestfallen at the situation today, and I'm sure she would have yelled in Italian, I told you so, but you didn't listen. And then she would have wept. In the words of one of her admirers, quote, Fallaci is no longer a simple journalist, but has become a prophetess of misfortune who warned us that Islam wanted to attack us, unquote. Well, let's turn to another very fierce and independent woman, and this is another loss, very recent, last week, maybe the week before. This is Marjane Satrapi, a French Iranian artist and an activist, the gutsy author of Persepolis, a graphic account of her struggle for freedom in Iran. She died far too young at age 56. She had been living in France with her Swedish husband. The French government announced, quote, her passing marks the loss of a leading figure in French culture and an artist committed to freedom, whose work carried a universal message and earned her immense international acclaim, unquote. Now, Satrapi was born into a secular activist family in 1969 in Rasht in northern Iraq. Her family and millions of other Iranians saw their lives yanked back to the Middle Ages. Marjane was 10 at the time, and at that age was bitter about having to wear a scarf to cover her hair. Then quickly came the avalanche of the Ayatollah's edicts to narrow and eliminate basic human freedom. All this is in her best-selling sensation Persepolis. It came out in 2000. The graphic novel depicted the revolution through the eyes of a young girl and then a young woman. Persepolis was adapted into film in 2007 and won the jury prize at the Cannes Film Festival that year. It was also nominated for an Academy Award. Satrapi's work spanned numerous graphic novels, which she preferred to call comic books and films. In 2019, she directed Radioactive, a British biographical film about Madame Curie starring Rosamund Pike. She was a supporter of women's life and freedom movement that emerged after the death of a young woman in police custody in 2022. Like Oriana Fallaci, she never lost her spunk. Last year, she announced that she had refused France's highest national award, the French Legion of Merit, over what she called the nation's hypocrisy. She said that while they pay lip service to fighting Iran, they do all sorts of business, and their Iranian sons and daughters will come and go to university there, go on shopping sprees. I don't know how she died. Her family said she died of sadness after her husband died last year, the Swede. Well, she sank into a deep depression and she was hospitalized. All right, did she take her life? I haven't read that yet. We will see. She might have been something like that, but we'll find out. But in any case, she tried to channel her grief before she died into something productive. She established the Matthias and Marjan Ripa Satrapi Cinema Foundation. It's an organization that supports international students who dream of studying filmmaking in Paris. So her legacy continues. It's too bad she died so young. Maybe her prestige could have encouraged fellow Iranians to rise up against the current regime in the near future. Maybe had she lived, she could have seen her country rid of this current regime. She gave so much. Well, let's sum up about this episode, which was about two courageous women fighting Islamofascism in Europe and Iran. Oriana Fallaci first fought the Italian and German fascists. She called out the hypocrisy and illiberalism among the world's leaders across the political spectrum. You know, I'm reminded of Holden Caulfield and J.D. Salinger's masterpiece, The Catcher in the Rye. Well, Holden was a boy and he was very cynical about life. He was a teenager and he didn't like grown-ups, but what did he hate most of all about grown-ups? That they were phonies. Oriana and Marjan felt the same way about establishment politicians. They made political statements about this and that, but they would not fight the Islamofascism in their midst. They often lied to win votes. So both these women spoke out against them in their collaboration with those who were trying to destroy the liberalism of the West they cherish. And God bless them for that. What women of honor. And thank you. Thank you for listening. Nothing in this podcast or in any other product of Kensington Consulting reflects the official position of the United States government. Now, my latest book, Cauldron of Terror, will come out in the summer. On behalf of Kensington Security Consulting, thank you for listening. And until the next podcast, out here.